Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Teaching English webinar for teacher educators, in which Will Grant will share some ways that early career teachers are supported in England. My name is Shirin Soyos, and I'll be your moderator today. So thank you so much for joining this live event. We have monthly webinars for our teacher educators, and you can register for our future sessions from our Teaching English website. So as we always do, before we start our session, I'd like to share a number of quick housekeeping reminders with you. And while waiting, please share with us in the Q&A where you are from. If you work in pre-service teacher education, type pre-service. If you work in in-service, type in-service in the Q&A. So I'd like to share these reminders. This session is being recorded, and a recording of the webinar is available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. The link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you'll receive this week. Again, finally, you will have a chance to ask questions to our presenter. Please use the Q&A to ask our presenter your questions. We'll be using the chat for announcements and Q&A box for questions. So let me introduce you to our presenter today. So Will Grant is a senior lecturer at the University of West of England, Bristol, and leads the secondary phase PGCE program. He has a personal background in the visual arts, teaching this discipline in a variety of English educational contexts before joining the university. And his research interests include initial teacher education, arts pedagogies, education and social justice, and curriculum design. So welcome, Will. Over to you to launch today's session.
Thank you, Sharon. Let me just get my slides up. It's great to be here. Good to see many people joining us. Well, what for us is this afternoon, I suppose, here in England. Okay, and as Sharon rightly said there, the focus of this afternoon's session is about supporting new teachers. And I can't pretend necessarily to speak for every teacher educator in England, but I'm hopefully going to provide you some information based on my own experiences in this sector, and look for opportunities to find connections to your own context when it comes to how best we can support new teachers to enter the classroom. As Sharon's already suggested, this kind of summarizes my background. I have a particular interest in secondary phase education. So whilst what I talk about for the most will, I hope, be of general interest to others, apologies in advance if I err towards talking about that phase. And again, as a subject discipline, my background has always very much been in the visual arts. So some of the examples that I draw on, or some of the case studies that I include, will probably be based primarily in that subject area, but hopefully will provide some opportunity for you to think about how my experiences can interconnect to your own challenges in supporting new teachers. As a teacher in England, I have a tendency to use a lot of acronyms, so sort of shortened versions of terms. I'm going to try not to do that in this international context, but one of the terms that I might use quite a lot is this term ITE, which is how we describe our initial teacher education in England. So just a warning there that that's what I'm talking about if I start to talk about ITE. So we're going to break this next hour into three key categories. I'm going to start by talking through an introduction to what ITE, or initial teacher education, has looked like in England over the last 20 years and bring us up to a contemporary context. So start to talk about what it looks like right now. We're essentially at this moment in time in quite a transitional phase in the way that new teachers are introduced to the profession in England. So I'm also then going to talk a little bit about the new beginnings. And by that, I mean the kind of curriculum and entryways into teaching that will exist in England from September 2024, so a year's time. Once I've kind of established what I hope is a broad understanding of our typical processes in England, I'll talk you through what I think are three of the main challenges that we have to deal with in this country. And those are summarized on this content slide here. So I'll talk a little bit about the disconnect between political interest and direction for the teaching profession, and then what the practice of teacher education looks like across the country. I'll talk about what is essentially a kind of real crisis at the moment in England, which is about teacher recruitment and retention. And a kind of link to that, I suppose, the problems that we see amongst new teachers, particularly when it comes to establishing a sense of professional belonging and personal well-being as they begin what we hope will be a long and happy career. And then in the final third of this presentation, I'm going to introduce a specific case study. So one sort of pedagogical component that we've been establishing at my university here, the University of the West of England, to try and address this final challenge. So to bring our new teachers into a sense of belonging amongst a kind of professional peer group that is a kind of nationally established organisation. So lots to cover. In this first section, the introduction, I want you to maybe be thinking about these questions whilst I talk. So first of all, I'm going to describe the changing landscape of teacher education in England, and it'd be interesting for me to know a little bit about how that compares to your own context. So whether our changes are similar nationally or internationally rather, or whether they represent an alternative provision to your own. And one of the key kind of concerns for us here in England at the moment is establishing exactly what roles different stakeholders might play in the education of new teachers. And in particular, the place of universities in this process and the role that schools themselves should play in preparing new teachers to join the profession. So, apologies in advance, there's quite a lot of information on my slides. I'm going to skip through some of them, but hopefully this slide set will then represent a resource that you might want to access at a later date. So if we rewind 20 years, almost all initial teacher education in England was operated by universities. It was very much considered the role of universities to prepare people for what was seen as a postgraduate profession. So that's teaching at any level, so primary level, secondary level, or what we call further education. So there's kind of later stages of educational provision as well. As we saw a change in government in the early 2000s, there began to be much more political interest in schools playing a larger part in the initial preparation of new teachers. The criticisms were made about the university's reliance on kind of theoretical knowledge and the disconnect that that might have for new teachers when they then actually get plunged into the reality of the classroom. This interest kind of grew over time and manifest in 2012 with the introduction of a new route into teaching called School Direct, where those people who might be interested in becoming a teacher would apply directly to an individual school who would promise them a training placement, often in partnership with the university still. So the university might still deliver those theoretical elements, but actually they were no longer the provider of that teacher education. The schools had come to the fore and taken kind of control and responsibility for introducing new people to the profession. And you can see through these numbers that over time, that balance of provision from universities and from schools has moved quite significantly. So if we look back a decade, in 2013, 67% of student teachers in England were still taught primarily through universities as their providers. By 2023, so this year, only 44% of our student teachers actually applied directly to a university to undertake their education. So the majority, or the small majority, now apply directly to schools to learn how to become a teacher and enter the profession. And there's a really telling quote halfway down that timeline, which really gives you a sense of the political perspective on this. And it's really a very unusual in its how candid I think that Nick Gibb, our schools minister, was at this point. Interestingly enough, Nick Gibb has only this month decided to step down as schools minister. So there might be some interesting changes there in our own political system. But you can see here how explicitly he felt, and I think the Department for Education, that part of our government that organises education in England, felt that academics and educational faculties of universities were disconnected from the realities of what schools required and the realities of how to improve an educational system. So there's quite a lot of friction there, and I'll talk about that a bit later when we come to talk about challenges. So today, what has been created, I suppose, is a marketplace of provision. There's hundreds of providers who you might choose to apply to if you choose to become a teacher in England. Many of those are still the universities who have provided this resource in some respects for hundreds of years, but with lots of other schools and groups of schools, academy trusts stepping in to also offer routes into teaching. this deregulation of the market was really seen as a way to recruit more teachers, maybe teachers who don't live near to a university or who are anxious about the academic expectations of university study. And the hope was that this would bring more people into the profession. And of course, in a way, this could be described as a supportive move because it creates more diversity in a marketplace for different people to feel that they might be welcomed into the teaching career. Now, it's interesting because although there are lots of different entry routes into teaching, the expectations of each of those routes, so the curriculum or format of that initial teacher education, remains quite strongly conditional on the government's policies. So wherever you train to teach in England, these expectations are required. You'll spend at least 120 days in schools on placement, and that has to be at least 2 different schools. And whichever pathway you take, you will receive 60 master's level credits. So there is still an academic expectation on all new recruits to the profession. So it can be complex for new teachers to know exactly where they want to apply and why, the benefits, the cost, the pros and cons of each of these routes. It's a little bit of a battleground at the moment, and that's highlighted perhaps by this note that I've included in the corner of this slide, because I think language matters, and I think the way that different stakeholders describe the beginning of a career in teaching is important. And you'll see here a kind of a bit of a disconnect in that the Department for Education, so that's the government department with responsibility for education, don't use this acronym ITE that I myself have been using, and instead will only refer to ITT, so initial teacher training. And I think there's something philosophically quite interesting in the difference between a training program and an education. So that's something perhaps that I'd be interested to hear more about from other international contexts as well. What is the language used to describe a route into teaching? So like I've said, it can be a confusing or complex space to apply to become a teacher in England today. You can search thousands of courses online, and that's an open access website run by the government. The expectations, again, are standardised across the country. So if you want to teach in England, you have to hold an honours degree already. So that's 360 credits of undergraduate study. And you also have to have, regardless of the subject that you hope to teach, a certain baseline grade in maths and English. So lots of our applicants then get a conditional offer to teach, but then go away and make sure that their maths and English is up to scratch. And if you want to teach at a primary school level, you also have to demonstrate a baseline understanding of the science curriculum as well. Those other acronyms you can see there, DBS and OH checks, are about making sure that your criminal record has been checked fully for obvious reasons, and occupational health has been checked as well to make sure that you have the capacity to undertake the expectations of a teaching role in a busy school. So all of those things, all of those expectations have to be met before someone can qualify to apply for a teacher's education in England. In terms of the process of applying, once you've gone through that government portal, you'd be invited to an interview. This varies based on provider, and post-COVID, many universities and schools are still running these interviews online. And it would normally involve a kind of relatively informal conversation about your rationale for wanting to teach a certain phase or subject, and a kind of preliminary kind of look at your subject knowledge. Before you begin your program, you might be asked to read certain key texts or undertake some project work. And one of the things that we found at UE, that's the university at which I work, is that we were getting lots of people accepting offers onto our program and then not arriving in the September when the program started. So we've been doing quite a lot of work in terms of trying to make sure that if someone accepts an offer from UE, they remain excited about coming to study with us, and they have all the information that they need to do so successfully. So you can see there we've included a kind of summer welcome day, online seminar sessions. This is before they're even registered on our program, and help with accommodation, visa applications, and other aspects of study as well. So that's really paid off in terms of supporting our student teachers before they've even actually officially joined the programme. And we've seen many more remain committed to starting their career as a result. So let's imagine that you're a new student teacher and you've just joined an ITE programme in England. While each programme will have its own character, but actually at the core, we all have to deliver the same centrally mandated curriculum. And this is relatively new. It was introduced in 2019, and it's called the ITT Core Content Framework. This is quite a long document. It's accessible online. It's about 49 pages, there you go. And this includes a series of statements that are evidence-based about what good teaching should look like, and essentially the kind of facts, well, skills and knowledge that new teachers should have to then continue successfully into the career. And this, I suppose, again, was an exercise in providing more support for student teachers. So trying to establish a real kind of core corpus of knowledge that they knew that they were entitled to. And that's been met with mixed success from providers, but I think in essence, it's a well-intended support mechanism for students as they go through that first year of their teacher education. Now, attached to that, well, in fact, I'll come in a minute to the next stage, but this, I just wanted to show you a very simplistic model of how we at the University of the West of England kind of build our curriculum for initial teacher education. You can see along the top here, those influences, and that document that I've just mentioned, absolutely at the centre. It's very important that we follow that, because the National Auditor for Education, Ofsted, if they came to inspect our provision and found that we didn't cover every component of the core content framework, we could be found to be inadequate. So that's key. But there's other things as well that enter into our curriculum. That includes the research interests of my colleagues, the research that they're producing, not just the evidence that they're finding elsewhere, and also our own kind of ethos and priorities for what we think makes a good teacher. That informs our local curriculum, and the outcomes of studying on our curriculum include those three red boxes you can see below. So a postgraduate certificate in education, the PGCE, that's the academic component of teacher education in England. You also get the professional component, which is a qualified teacher status, and many schools require you to have this status to be able to be paid at a higher rate as a qualified teacher. And you also get those 60 master's level credits, and many of our students return to study with us some further credits to then take home a full master's qualification in education. So if we imagine then that you've undertaken your first year of teacher education and you've attained qualified teacher status, you then secure your first job in a school, hopefully one which is a good fit for your priorities. Now, in the past, we had a single year of support for these new teachers in schools, and this was seen as inadequate. You can see here in that quotation from the Department for Education that in the past, it was viewed that too often new teachers didn't enjoy the support that they need to thrive in English classrooms. So that kind of support framework was extended to be a 2-year programme during your first job in a school called the Early Career Framework. And there's a few things that are involved in this. You can see them bullet pointed here too. It enabled you or it gave you access to, entitlement to, a curriculum of training materials, a reduction in timetable teaching for those first 2 years, not a significant reduction, but a 10% reduction in year 1 and then a 5% reduction in year 2. It gave another colleague in your department funding to be your mentor, so to buy out some of their time to be able to support you through those early years. So again, a very well-intended kind of process to provide additional support for teachers during those critical early years of their career as they establish kind of confidence and competence in their individual practice. So that's where we are at the moment. But within 12 months, things will be changing. And again, some of these changes have been put in place because we are still seeing issues with teacher recruitment and retention. So more support is required. The ITT market review was quite a controversial process, and I'll come to that, like I said, in the middle section of this presentation. But to sort of summarize, and this is very much a simplification, but a summary of sort of the two core changes that are being made to teacher education in England. There's now a much higher expectation in the quality of mentors in schools. You might remember that I said you have to spend at least 120 days in school whilst you train over your first year of teacher education, and then of course continue to have mentor support for the 2 years after. The problem in the past has been the very checkered quality of that mentoring. Those mentors are often just other busy working teachers in schools who can't always guarantee you the time and space you need to oversee your development as a new teacher effectively. So hopefully more resource and training in this space will play a really important role in improving that component of teacher education. And the other thing that's expected is kind of a closer collaboration and conversation between whoever the provider of initial teacher education is, maybe a university, maybe a large organisation of schools, and the individual placement school themselves. Because what we've often seen again in the past is a very rigorous and interesting and research-rich curriculum at the university, but then a disconnect between that and the information and resource that students have when they then go onto their school placements. And the teachers and the university lecturers not always collaborating effectively to make clear the links between the theoretical and practical. So the introduction of a new mechanism, what the government has called an intensive training and practice period, involves 20 new days of provision, which will focus, as it says here, on specific foundational areas of the curriculum and intend to have high impact on the actual practice that trainees can evidence in the classroom. So to summarize that first section, you can see, or will have seen, I hope, through that information, an accelerating shift towards a school-delivered model of education, and that there's been an increase in the government's involvement in the framework to deliver that. For new teachers, there has been, for the first time in 2019, a core curriculum of knowledge and skills that they should expect to receive or learn during their teacher education, and additional support for the first 2 years of their career. And from next year, there's this expectation, in particular, that school mentors will be better trained and more involved in initial teacher education provision. So I'm going to pause there for questions before I move on to talk about challenges.
Thank you so much, Will. We have one question from Narimene. And Narimene says, I'm a new university lecturer. Actually, my question might be out of topic, but I have to ask you for a piece of advice. Since I'm almost their age, I have found some difficulties in managing their behavior. What do you suggest to avoid this problem, please?
Well, that's a question, of course, that our student teachers ask all the time, because classroom management and behavior is a challenge. I think what's quite interesting as you spend more time as a teacher educator is the transition that you yourself make from often relying on anecdote and your own previous experience in the classroom, and transitioning towards a model where you are employing more kind of theory in the work that you do, and leaning into sort of an evidence base of quality research. So it might be that if you, at the beginning of your career as a teacher educator, are relying too much on your own experience, your own anecdote, that actually it would help for you to assert your authority as a teacher educator to be able to include more of an evidence base or research rich kind of curriculum, and then students might see the value that you can add to their education, regardless of whether they hope to do things similar to the things that you might have done in your own career. And the other thing I've done on that front actually is bring in a lot more external contributors to our curriculum. So that is some of the teachers who work in our placement schools, but who have expertise in particular areas. So for example, one teacher who works in a very difficult central Bristol school, who's excellent at providing information on inclusive education for refugee children and others who might be based in that school, who is far more experienced than I am to talk on that context. So by drawing on that network of experience, it can kind of help create more of a collegiate program rather than having to take on all of that responsibility yourself. I'm not sure that quite answered the question, but hopefully it helps.
Yes, I think it's very practical. Thank you so much. And Rochelle says, what role will university teacher education staff play in NQT support in the new model?
It's a great question, and I think that is still a space to be negotiated as we enter the new model. I think the danger is that the process of educating teachers in England becomes too vocational and relies only on the experiences of practitioners in the classroom today, and that academics and thinkers and theorists and researchers in the educational space will be even further disconnected from that process of bringing new teachers into the profession. And that's problematic for lots of reasons, not least the kind of public standing of teachers as professionals and the kind of expectations placed on a professional to be up to date with contemporary practice and theory. But it also, I think, is problematic from the university's perspective, in that for a long time, there's been this really healthy kind of backwards and forwards between schools and universities in good models working together to enhance each other's provision. So watch this space, but hopefully the new relationships or dynamics will be formed.
Okay, so we have one more question from Said. So teaching at girls' middle school, students here are weak in learning and parents hardly ask them to learn. So could you share us, or maybe you will mention how to keep teachers motivated? How do you do this in the next slide? So will you mention this in the challenges? So you decide, Will, how to move forward.
Yeah, sure. I think I'll probably touch on sort of motivating teachers a little bit later, but if I don't, we can maybe come back to that question if there's still more to be said later on.
Okay, thank you, colleagues, and yes, now we can continue with the challenges, right?
Thank you, Shirin. Appreciate it. Okay, so I've already talked briefly about the sort of three challenges I've pulled out here, and they are kind of interconnected to one another, and there's many other things that challenge us in the sector, but I think these are really key and perhaps will resonate with you regardless of your context. So these are the questions that you might want to ask yourself while I teach, while I talk. To what extent do you feel education to be a neutral public provision in your context, or to what extent is it politicized? Would you suggest that teachers in your context are autonomous, they go self-governing, or do you think that there is a lot of control exerted by external agencies? This is something that the profession is grappling with here. And then second, one of the main challenges I'll talk about in a moment is this issue of recruitment and retention of teachers. And I'm interested to know from around the world whether this is something that's happening globally or whether it's very specific to an English context. And also, of course, if you know the answer as to how we can recruit and retain more teachers in the sector, then do share. So the first challenge that I've hinted at is that as the government's become more interested in asserting itself in educational policy, that's ruffled some feathers among those who work in the sector. And most recently, although we might admire some of the potential outcomes of the recent market review, you know, the potential support that this additionally will provide for student teachers, it was a very controversial mechanism. The review did not accept evidence for a very long period of time, and for lots of teacher educators, particularly those working from university education schools or departments, felt that this wasn't so much a consultation and was much more the government asserting a new way of working. And you can see here that includes some of the most well-respected educational providers in the country. So the University of Cambridge and the University of Oxford, both of whom currently operate initial teacher education as part of their provision, were both deeply concerned by the proposals. Now, the problem here really was about academic agency or autonomy, because the more that the government expected us to teach a particular curriculum underlined with research that was chosen by them, the less academics working in the field felt that they had the autonomy to keep that research up to date, to question that research, and to encourage student teachers to be critical of research, something that at the moment many of us would think of as very important for teachers. And one of the problems that many had with this process was they felt it was politicized. And you can see, well, you heard already Nick Gibbs' statement about university educators. You can see here again from a recent article, this sense that the government might want to intentionally push universities out of the sector because they're worried about universities being a place of critique of systems established nationally. So it's a slightly delicate space at the moment, and many providers, both universities and schools, are having to reconsider the extent to which they want to work in this space, given the new expectations, whether that's economically viable, given these new kind of expectations of the market review, and also whether they want to be part of a system which is arguably more homogenous, more generalized, and more centralized in its organization. On top of that, this move towards a vocational provision, so one that is primarily based in schools rather than accessing the expertise of the university, is, by all accounts, moving in an opposite direction to many of our international competitors. And this is already what things look like at the moment. You can see in this table here that in England, the typical amount of time you might spend studying to become a teacher is 4 years. So that's 3 years of undergraduate study and then a single year of postgraduate study. This isn't untypical or atypical against many other countries, but it is towards the lower end of expectations. So you can see this quote here from Clare and Parker summarizes the concern of many very well by sort of talking about how removing universities from teacher education could ultimately erode the intellectual basis of the profession and also its agency, so its ability to self-govern. And you look at that in comparison perhaps to other professions, so the legal profession or the health profession, and we see quite different organizational structures when it comes to their capacity to self-govern and be independent of a political will. Now, one of the, again, sort of interrelated issues here, I suppose, is that with these changes has come issues in the recruitment and retention of teachers. And this is really quite an acute problem. You can see that in this most recent academic year, in the last academic year rather, a very much smaller number of trainee teachers were taken onto ITE programs in England. This is a problem across all subject areas and across all phases, including for the first time this year, primary. But there are some areas where this is a real problem, highlighted on the right there. So, for example, last year, we only actually recruited in England 17% of the physics teachers that the government themselves predicted required to fill all of the vacancies in schools. So this is a particularly acute problem across the subjects you can see here, but actually increasingly so is the case across all subjects, aside from physical education and history, which for some reason remain very popular among undergraduate applicants. So, we're kind of wrestling very much with ways that we might bring more students into the profession to meet the needs of a growing population and a shrinking workforce. Just some statistics to kind of contextualize that further. The target overall has been missed by about 50% this year, so 48%, and that has issues for providers in being able to be secure in knowing how many students might start their programs. We do quite well here at the University of the West of England because we have a good reputation, so our numbers remain buoyant. But for many of the smaller providers, including those school direct providers I mentioned earlier, who might only take a handful of students each year, it means the viability of those programs becomes endangered, because if they only have 1 or 2 students studying to become teachers each year on their program, it's not very easy to run. So why is this? Why are we seeing such a dramatic reduction in applicants to teaching in England? Well, there's probably lots of reasons. It's a complicated picture, isn't it? And I've named some of them on the right here. There's lots of factors. All of these perhaps again interrelated or feeding into each other. We have relatively good employment rates in England at the moment, so there are not that many people looking for jobs. We have lots of people, particularly in those high need areas of physics, maths, who could find better paid jobs in other areas of industry. So the experience, the pay of teachers has dropped significantly in real terms, and that's had an impact probably on recruitment numbers. We also have this fragile or changeable political space. We've had 6 different secretaries of state for education over the last 3 years. So a wider kind of political turmoil in England has kind of led to destabilized policy. Seems to be lots of change over time, and not many people overseeing that change for significant periods. So there's lots of issues there that are really quite deep issues and difficult to solve or difficult to kind of remedy. One of the solutions that's been around for a while, or potential solutions in England, has been to provide a bursary for anybody interested in teaching. And you can see that these are targeted at those high need areas. So for next year, September 2024, if you would like to start to learn to become a teacher in England, you would receive this sum of money when you begin your programme. Actually, it's staggered over 10 months into 10 payments. This is a very generous payment for some of these students. So £28,000, and this is tax-free money, so the equivalent of earning about £45,000 if you are working, is available to you if you want to train to teach computing or chemistry or maths. This is something that the DfE, the Department for Education, has been doing for some time, to greater and lesser extent each year. But the current cost of offering this is suggested to be in the many hundreds of millions of pounds. And you'll note also that something that's happened very recently is the government in England reaching out to many other nation states to try and drive more international recruitment for teachers in England. You can see here there's an international relocation payment for £10,000 if you want to come from abroad to teach languages or physics in England. So in total, this is a pretty generous package. If you, for example, live in Nigeria or France or Singapore, you could apply to train to teach in England, arrive, and be eligible for nearly £40,000 worth of funding. So it's a huge investment from the Department for Education financially. We've seen a significant increase in international applications this year. In the past, of 120 students, I typically have 2 or 3 from international backgrounds. This year we have 27. So that's going to have a real impact on the diversity in a positive sense, but also the challenges of new teachers coming into the profession in England, and how they're going to adjust to the particular provision expected in this country. So that's a very changing space and an interesting one to watch. Of course, the evidence is difficult to measure, but this report by Noyes in 2019 is interesting because it suggests that. And of course, the issue of recruitment numbers would suggest that financial incentive alone is not enough to actually support recruitment, particularly in those high need areas. So what else can we do? Well, the third challenge that I want to mention, and this of course again is tied very much to the recruitment and retention problem, is the crisis that we see in many classrooms around teachers not feeling like they have the support and professional belonging of a career or a profession, and that their personal well-being is negatively affected as a result. And you can imagine in a market where there's hundreds of providers, each of whom might only host a handful of student teachers, placing them for 120 days in isolation in a busy professional environment, which itself could be defined by poor retention and morale among working teachers, that actually maintaining that morale among new teachers becomes very difficult. Stress and anxiety is commonplace. The cost of living in England is rising, so many students we find are working jobs alongside studying to teach, which is very intensive. And so we've had to try and find ways that we can support these students. Otherwise, we lose them before they even join the workforce. So what do we do? Well, here's some of the things we do at UE to support those teachers. We work at the beginning of an ITE program to build a really secure community of subject knowledge, so that students, once they enter their placement schools and then continue into their careers, have a kind of an inbuilt support network of like-minded students. that's, I think, a really valuable attribute to a large provider such as ours, because those students have a bigger community to access who can support each other. We also are lucky in that as a large university, we have institutional support services that work very hard when it comes to things like finding housing for our international students or helping them with visa applications, supporting our students' mental health through what's a very busy and rigorous program, looking at their financial health and other things. So we refer lots of our students to those wider university support networks. And I worry about a teacher education landscape where smaller providers with less students operating within them don't have access to that kind of critical mass of support. And the last thing that we do, and that we're doing increasingly successfully, is to make sure that we stay in touch with our alumni. So as our teachers leave and go off to start those early careers, we stay connected to them informally, but also formally, encouraging them then to return to us and act as school-based mentors. So there's a kind of feedback loop then between us and the communities that we're seeding locally. Alongside what we provide, we also steer students very much to the national organisations that can promote collegiality and therefore hopefully keep people in the careers of the classroom. And there's two kind of key organisations here that would be worth researching if you don't know them and are interested in similar kind of projects in your context. The Chartered College of Teaching, it's an organisation with a long heritage, but has actually only been created in its current format in the last few years. This is a learned society for teachers with an academic journal, which is focused on kind of generating very contemporary evidence-based advice for teachers. And this is a self-initiated organisation free from government. And their premise is that over time, as they grow and establish kind of authority within the sector, they might start to take on some independent responsibilities for ensuring the quality of teaching and the recruitment of teachers in the country, and taking that responsibility away from a more centralised government organisation. The other support network, which I have found very useful, both as a teacher and a teacher educator, is the subject associations. So for my subject of art and design, we have the National Society for Education in Art and Design. It's 150 years old in England. And they are a community of art and design teachers who produce resources that are subject specific, organise events, bring together continued professional development, and are a kind of ready-made community of like-minded peers who can offer support. They also happen to be an industrial union, so can offer legal advice and other support to teachers as well. So I find that these organisations were really important in helping me through those early years of my career, and also have proven to be so for my student teachers as well. So anything where you can tap into these external organisations, I think is helpful. So to summarise there very briefly those challenges that we face in England. First of all, it feels increasingly that both the content, so the curriculum, and also the format of delivery, teacher education in England has become politicised. And therefore there's more friction between the stakeholders in the sector, whether that's universities, school, policy writers in government, auditors like Ofsted. There's no clear agreed best practice at this moment in time. Policies that attempt to financially incentivize applicants, which is really the primary lever that's been employed to try and improve and drive recruitment to the profession, haven't resolved the recruitment challenges. We're in more of a crisis than we ever have been. And it feels, therefore, that maybe more creative thinking is required to solve that particular challenge. And then once we have teachers in our profession, retention of them is poor, with 1 in 5 teachers leaving within the first few years of their career, due primarily to the workload expectations, early career burnout, and well-being, which obviously is a tragedy when we lose good people from the classroom for these reasons alone. So I'll take some questions now, and then I'll talk about one project that we've been running to try and address some of these issues.
Okay, Neil, we have so many comments and questions. So we also asked our audience if they would like to share if they have, sorry, what was the question? Retention, you mentioned retention. And is retaining teachers a problem in the countries, territories where you are based? And there are also lots of comments about it. And I'd like to start with this one. So Rochelle says we also have an acute retention problem in Africa, and summarizes the situation. So they support teachers in their first year. The goal is teacher retention, as there is no formal apprenticeship for new teachers in South Africa, and their project provides a safe place for the new teachers. And as teacher educators, they also learn so much from this process, which feedbacks into their teacher education. And there is a link she shared, so I will share this link with you. So thank you very much, Rochelle, and all our colleagues who shared their experience in the Q&A. So I would like to continue with Shibi's question about the challenges. How can a new teacher effectively provide inclusion to an entirely diverse group of school students? So how do you cope with the inclusion with this area?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I suppose if I was giving advice to a new teacher, there's a few strategies I'd advise. First, of course, learn from colleagues around you, because if you're new to that particular context, it's likely that others have established some effective strategies. And I think too often, actually, beyond ITE, teachers begin their career and find themselves quite isolated in their own classroom, and they don't have the same opportunities to go and observe expert colleagues teach. But any opportunity where that can take place is really valuable for continuing to build a kind of toolkit of methods for addressing issues such as diversity. I think the other thing that's really important, which is quite simple really, is about approaching the classroom with a sense of empathy. And I mentioned before one of the local schools we have where there's a lot of refugee students who study there, and so understanding the lived experience of your pupils is important. Can be challenging, of course, if you are working in an environment where there's a diversity of languages and other things that could act as a barrier. But I've seen teachers use things as simple as Google Translate, to put instructions into different languages, and often, making a small symbolic effort to try and include as many of those students as possible is really meaningful, because it's just demonstrating that you see those students. You might not be able, given the stresses and challenges of the classroom, to provide everything that would allow them to accelerate, but making evident the fact that you are willing to try and that you care to do so, I think is really meaningful. So those are kind of two things, I suppose, that I'd recommend in the first instance. But yeah, it's a really tough thing in an increasingly diverse society and classroom. It can be difficult.
Yes, but it will also be helpful for all students, so it's good practice for them as well. Another question from Ellen relating to support. So the question discusses the exclusion of English language TESOL teachers from a teacher recruitment policy that includes other language teachers. And she inquires about the practicality and response of schools in England. So do schools in England really attend to international application in response to the international teacher recruitment policy?
I don't know if I grasp the kind of detail of that question. I think if we're talking more generally about providers in England looking increasingly at international recruitment, that is definitely something that's happening when it comes to the provision that we have in teacher education. For the first time, we've been working with international agents to recruit from abroad because of the challenge of recruiting at home. So we have, for some reason at UE this year, we have quite a large Canadian cohort of students, I think because a particular piece of marketing has happened in that space, in that nation. And of course, other nations that maybe the government more generally has targeted to kind of suggest teaching as a career path in England. So as I said, yeah, it's a very significant change in the student demographic, and the kind of the benefits and challenges of that we're only kind of grappling with now. From the simple things such as kind of going through the visa process, which we've never had to be experts in before, but now are kind of having to upskill very much in our department. to handle that. So it certainly feels like a paradigm shift. Whether that will continue, I'm not sure. And what that will look like as it feeds into schools, I'm not sure, where a teacher workforce might then become more international in turn also. I mean, there could be some wonderful benefits to that, but also I'm sure for those involved, various challenges. So yeah, in a big picture, I think that England is doing more to look outward when it comes to teacher education. But in terms of the specifics of TESOL and how that works alongside other programs, I can't be certain, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Well, there is one more question. Fatima says, the education system in England is different from other countries, and the question is that can the organization help these countries to acquire and apply, and how? So in terms of the similar challenges being faced in different countries, or maybe different challenges, so including England. So what would you say about this?
Yeah, I think that might be one of the sad realities of universities being less involved in teacher education, if we do move in that direction, because I think one of the things that universities can do is look outwards and be very international in the way that they operate, in a way that maybe, you know, a handful of schools in a rural location in England is less accustomed to doing so. So, for example, again, here at UWE, we have a very strong and well-established link to the University of Zululand in South Africa. And we do a lot of work with them and the local schools in that area, as they do with us, to kind of share good practice and think about teacher education, and also kind of some of our student teachers go and teach in that location, and some of their faculty come here as well. So those kind of quite high-profile collaborations between institutions may become more difficult over time, which would be a great shame. In terms of at a governmental level, I don't know how much sharing there is. I think education too frequently is positioned as a competitive space. You know, things like PISA rankings haven't necessarily helped in that regard. So I don't know how much willingness there is between governments to kind of share good practice. And again, because it's often a very politicized space, I'm not sure that always it's kind of an evidence-led approach that comes forward. So yes, I think there's different actors in that kind of the international reach of good practice. And I also wouldn't suggest that England is perfect in that respect. So we still hope to learn a lot from other international kind of connections as well.
Okay, thank you so much. So we'll have one more Q&A, colleagues, so we can please keep writing your questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, great. No, these are really, really interesting questions, and I'm sorry if I can't answer them in full, but I'll do my best. Okay, so I'm going to talk now just probably quite briefly about one particular aspect of our curriculum at the University of the West of England that we created as an attempt to address some of the issues of sort of professional belonging in the in being a new art teacher. So this is very much a case study, and this was work that I did specifically with a small group of art and design teacher education students, and we worked across institutions. So we brought 4 universities together to organise a national conference, which took place in our National Gallery in London, in an attempt to demonstrate to our student teachers that they were part of a larger collective of like-minded individuals, that actually coming together allowed them to see for themselves how important their work was, and to network with others who might feel similarly. And also to establish a precedent for the importance of collegiality, working together, collaborating in order to find fulfillment and success and stability in your career in the classroom. So the sort of theory or the research is very clear on this, and there was a summary of this research produced by Shah in 2012, which highlighted kind of, I guess, 3 key strands as to why we might want to encourage new teachers to be collegiate as a core concern. One of them is knowledge share. They can learn from each other. So at the conference, for example, all of the content was student-led, and students delivered a variety of different presentations from different universities, and were able to learn from each other's experiences really effectively. So that's a kind of transactional outcome of collegiality, but also this sense of well-being, because if you feel connected to others, if you feel supported by others, if you feel part of a larger calling or a larger organization, and that you're not alone or isolated in your work, it can stimulate that enthusiasm for your work and for wanting to succeed, and ambition or open-mindedness for what might be possible. So that's also really valuable. And then last, and this is particularly important, I think, for someone who might be wanting to become an art and design teacher, because the arts in education in England have been under threat for a while, is that it allows you, if you come together with like-minded peers, if you are collegiate in the way you work, it produces this disciplinary dialogue, so opportunity to build a community of like-minded individuals. And that's important if, as I've explained, you are operating in a context of very changeable policy and expectations. It can provide that kind of anchor, a professional anchor amongst all of that uncertainty. So that's why we organised. This was the theoretical basis for why we organised the conference. And we're very passionate about this as teacher educators. So that includes myself from the University of West of England, but also colleagues from the University of Brighton, from Goldsmiths, which is in London, and from Bath Spa University. So we brought all of our students together. We actually also, after this, worked with two other institutions, so Roehampton University and the University College London, brought together about 100 student art and design teachers, which represents probably about 25% of all of the art and design student teachers in England at any one time. So this was a significant component of that demographic. We essentially, as I mentioned, based the organisation of this event around students leading the content. So their presentations were very varied, and I'll explain some examples of those in a moment. And we also obviously made use of the galleries, because as you can see there, the National Gallery in England is a wonderful resource for those interested in art and design education, and introduced a couple of kind of group activities as well. And what was key for us is that we also gave them space to just talk to each other, to learn from each other. So it was as simple as that, really, to see each other reflected in other organisations. Here's some examples of the kinds of things that the students decided they wanted to speak about. And these were 5-minute presentations, very low risk, and very collegiate in the way that they were then questioned and kind of discussed by the larger group. And you can see here that they're very specific to those people who want to be art and design teachers. So talking about photography or classroom practice, or particular artistic processes such as tracing or experimental drawing. And I think because this was so disciplinary in nature, it became a really engaging day for all of those who participated. So the findings were very positive. You can see here, we undertook some research, some evaluative research on how participants felt. Most there you can see really excited about contributing towards a sort of ongoing collegiate community in art and design education, or at least seeing it as interesting. Some of the key benefits that were mentioned by those who attended included the words you can see here. And, I think what's important perhaps is that learning to work with others and learning to enjoy working with others is both helpful in the current way that education is organised in England, which, if you're not aware, is typically provided by what we call multi-academy trusts, so companies that run and operate a group of schools, and you might have to work with colleagues from other schools. But it's also a useful skill for those who want to imagine alternative futures, who want to get together and discuss other ways that educational systems might work. So there was lots of things that participants could get from this experience, and just pulling them into that different space we felt was important, and kind of moving beyond a kind of classroom delivered content. And this was really nice to see as well, because they also spoke generally about what they perceived to be the benefits of collegiality as a kind of professional disposition, so why this was important. And, you know, we in England at the moment, as I touched on, the context could be described as one of competition. You know, schools are often seen to compete with one another for the academic results of their pupils, and to compete for in all sorts of ways in league tables. But this was about us questioning that convention and asking new teachers to maybe reframe the way that they work with others from other institutions to the benefit of learners. And this obviously is a diversity of things that they felt would be helpful or positive outcomes of that experience. So this is something that we now hope to run on an annual basis and hopefully include more partners. And again, I think it's something that can really demonstrate the benefits, and you can tell I have a position on this, the benefits of a university-based teacher education system where academics such as myself can organise these events and make sure that a critical mass of students attend these events in a way that maybe individual school providers would find difficult with the capacity they have among staff. So, you know, I think that this sort of activity, when it comes to improving students' sense of professional belonging and personal well-being, are best positioned within a kind of university-led system. So to sort of summarize, that's a very brief kind of overview of that particular event, but, you know, just as an example, I suppose, of ways you might yourselves be operating and looking to improve the well-being of your student teachers. But to summarize, I think these were the truths that emerged for me. First, that new teachers in England and potentially anywhere really benefit from networking with peers, people going through the same experiences as them and asking the same questions. And that if you can engender that disposition of collegiality, of wanting to work with others among new teachers, that's great because it allows them to share knowledge, improve their well-being, and establish a disciplinary dialogue. And hopefully they will then take that interest in working collegiately into the first years of their career, and that in turn might have a positive impact on the retention of teachers through those early years. So that's just one potential strategy to try and improve in that area. And that's it. So Shirin, I don't know if there's some more questions that have emerged during that final section.
Yes, lots of questions about also well-being and burnout, and one question about mentoring. So we'll what we would like to ask you, is mentoring and encouraging collaboration a good way to combat this early career burnout?
Absolutely. The mentor is a really key person in the ecosystem of new teachers coming into the profession. And we've worked hard to change the mindset of some of our mentors at UE, because I think traditionally, quite a lot of our mentors who have been heads of departments, well-established teachers, expert practitioners, have struggled with two things. First of all, they're very busy. So a new student teacher in their department is a low priority when they've got lots of other things to worry about. And second, they're often less flexible about accepting alternative ways to measure success in the classroom. They'll have their way of doing things, and they might expect new teachers to conform to their own standards. Now, both of those things are problematic if you're a new teacher, and also problematic if you're interested in creativity and innovation in the classroom. So what we've done at UE is we've pivoted away from always using those expert colleagues as mentors in our ecosystem, and we've been engaging with other new teachers in the career. So if you've only been teaching for 2 or 3 years, I think actually you might be very well positioned to become a mentor for someone who's just coming into the classroom as well, because you have empathy for their position. You've recently gone through the same experience. You potentially have more time and availability to be able to support that colleague. And you yourself might still be more open to different ways of working. So I think that's been really positive change for us, not to dismiss all of the wonderful expertise that many of our well-established teachers contribute, but I think that's just a change in priority. That's been very positive for many of our new new teachers who now are slightly less intimidated by the expectations of their mentors. And I must say, I think also there was a tradition of teaching being viewed as a sink or swim career path. So we'd chuck you into the classroom, see if you can cope, and if you can't, well, you're just going to have to find some other career path, which is really bizarre when often teachers who hold that view are really supportive and understanding of slow development among the pupils in their classroom. They take a very different approach. You just think, well, you have to understand that someone who's new to teaching is still going to require a lot of coaching and developmental support to establish both the confidence and competence that they need to then sort of, fly solo, if you wish. So yeah, I think that is important.
Yes, absolutely. I wish, yes, everyone has this approach, so it would be really a more smooth journey at the beginning of each teacher's career. So thank you so much, Will. We would like to ask you one more question, but this one is about your area, about with respect to arts. So Aninda wanted to find out more about the value of museum excursions in education. Would you tell us about it? How important do you think are these? And yes, if you could share your final views about it, that would be great.
Of course. Well, I don't think that's just an arts concern. Actually, I think that can be applied quite generally, because I'm very passionate about learning beyond and outside of the classroom. And if you want to encourage young people to be lifelong learners, we want to put them into contexts that are novel and exciting. So it's been really good post-COVID to see a number of schools in England recognise that. There was a period of time, of course, where students really didn't travel outside of the school. And there are still economic, pressures on taking young people out of school and onto trips. But at a personal level, I'm very passionate about that as a component of effective education. And when it comes to the arts in particular, I suppose the field trip or visits to galleries are really important for all sorts of reasons, not least because sometimes those spaces are viewed as rarefied spaces that people sometimes don't feel very welcomed within. And so I think taking young people there and modeling what it means to be in a gallery, how you can enjoy being in a gallery, is a learnt, cultured experience. And so if you haven't been given that opportunity, and I don't come from a background where we went to galleries very frequently as a young person, so I understood as a teacher that could be seen as an intimidating or simply boring kind of space to be based as a young person, unless you're taught how to act and engage with that kind of culture. So I think it's a really important part of kind of cultural learning, also encouraging that independence of thought. From a teacher education perspective, I also work with a number of gallerists, which is really interesting. So we have two organisations in Bristol that contribute to my programme, the Arnolfini, which is a contemporary art space, and then also the Royal West of England Academy, which is a much more traditional gallery down the road. And I take all of the student teachers there, and they talk to the gallerists, and they talk to the education officers, and they plan hypothetical activities they could run with young people in those gallery spaces. And my intent there is to, again, I suppose, take a collegiate approach to how other public institutions like galleries or libraries or industry partners should be involved in the kind of full education of young people in schools. There's so much on offer there that I think really could still be further exploited by teachers in English schools if there was a bit more ambition about how to structure and organise that sort of curriculum. So yeah, I'm passionate about that, and I think that there's a great role that galleries can play. But I've also seen a lot of school trips where students get off a coach, they are kind of shuffled into a gallery, they spend a couple of hours there, and they get back on the coach. And that's not really enough. It does need to be taught. It does need to be guided as an experience in order for students to get the most from it, and for it to be a genuine learning opportunity rather than a kind of an excuse to take a day out of school. An excuse that I'm sure I took quite a lot when I was a teenager, but there we go.
Thank you. Yes, that's real learning outside the class, and it's really very practical, your suggestions. Thank you so much, Will.
You're very welcome.
Input, for your insights on the topic. So And thank you so much, our colleagues, for your questions. We hope you found the session useful, and it's been an interdisciplinary session for us, so very eye-opening. And in terms of the comments and questions, I think we haven't had this topic before. So thank you, Will, for sharing your ideas. So colleagues, we have also shared with you in the chat. So we have a new CPD framework and a self-assessment tool. And the recording of the webinar and slides will be available on Teaching English in the next couple of days. And the link to the certificate will be provided in the thank you email that you will receive this week. And please share your feedback with us. You will see the feedback form in the chat. And don't forget to subscribe for our monthly newsletters for teacher educators. And our next webinar next month is about digital literacy. How can we help teachers develop their understanding, approach, and skills? So we very much hope to see you again in the next sessions. And I'd like to thank our presenter once again for their participation and sharing these useful insights. So thanks, everyone. Hope to see you again in the next sessions.